The usual cheerful cacophony of street vendors and children playing seems muted, replaced by an uneasy quiet that settles like dust. You notice fewer ships at the river dock, and the ones that are there seem to unload their cargo with a frantic, almost panicked haste. Remember that exotic spice merchant you haggled with last month? His stall has been empty for 3 days now. No one asks why. Not allowed anyway. It's a Tuesday, or maybe a Thursday. The days are starting to blur with a certain grim sameness. When the summons arrives, it's not a polite parchment scroll delivered by a liveried servant. It's a heavy thud on your door, the kind that makes your heart jump into your throat. Peeking through a crack in the wooden shutters, you see 2 figures. Not knights or nobles, but grim-faced aldermen from the town council, their usual portly confidence visibly deflated, replaced by a sheen of sweat and desperation. They look like men who haven't slept well and who suspect they won't be sleeping well again anytime soon. This is it. The abstract fear is about to become very, very concrete. You open the door, and their eyes lock onto yours with an intensity that makes you want to step back. They don't bother with pleasantries. The usual lengthy medieval courtesies are conspicuously absent. One of them, a portly man named Master Albrecht, who usually spends his days arguing over market taxes, gets straight to the point. His voice is hoarse. "We have a proposition for you," he says, and the word proposition sounds unusually sinister in this context. It's less of an offer, more of a barely veiled plea mixed with a command. You see, the town's only actual university-trained physician, a man of advanced years and even more advanced pomposity, conveniently remembered he had urgent family business in a far-off, miraculously untouched region the moment the first suspicious boils appeared. A classic medieval, "I'm outta here." They want you. You with your smattering of questionable knowledge, or perhaps just your strong stomach and lack of immediate alternatives. They're offering coin, of course. More coin than you've seen in one place, probably. Enough to make you pause, to make that little voice of self-preservation stutter for a moment. But it's the unspoken part of the deal that hangs heavy in the air. You'll be walking into the embrace of the sickness, the very thing everyone else is desperately trying to avoid. Historians still argue whether the initial wave of individuals who took up the role of plague doctor were driven more by a dearth of other options, a kind of fatalistic bravery, or by a complex mix of altruism and opportunism. For you, right now, it feels mostly like a trap with a gilded bait. They tell you the great mortality, as some are already calling it, is upon your town. It's a phrase that will echo through the centuries, a chillingly accurate descriptor for events like the Black Death, which, as a historical fact, first swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, wiping out a staggering percentage of the population, but plague itself would return in waves for hundreds of years. This isn't just a bad flu season. This is an existential threat. The councilmen explain that they need someone, anyone, to attend to the sick. The word cure is carefully avoided. They know. You know. Success isn't really part of the job description. Presence is. Recording deaths is. Perhaps, just perhaps, offering some small feudal comfort, or at least the illusion of medical intervention. You look past their strained faces, out into the street. The sun is shining, birds are singing somewhere, but it all feels like a painted backdrop to a play you never auditioned for. You might have heard some quirky tidbits about how other towns are trying to cope. People burning aromatic woods like juniper and ash in their homes, hoping the scented smoke will drive away the bad air, or clutching amulets filled with equally fragrant and equally useless herbs. It's a time when a pleasant smell is considered a form of preventative medicine. If only it were that simple. The councilmen are waiting for your answer, their anxiety a palpable force. The choice, if you can even call it that, is laid bare. Almost certain poverty and possible starvation if you refuse, and the town's economy collapses entirely, or a dangerous, terrifying job that might kill you. but at least you'll die with a slightly heavier purse. It's not exactly a win-win, is it? The silence in your small, damp room stretches taut after the councilmen leave. Their footsteps clatter away down the cobbled street, fading into the uneasy quiet that has become your town's new soundtrack. There wasn't much of a negotiation, was there? More like a conscription with a signing bonus. You find yourself nodding slowly, a grim resignation settling in your stomach like undigested fear. The coin they left on your table, a small cloth bag heavy with unfamiliar promise and even heavier dread, seems to stare back at you. It's the price of your fear, or perhaps the down payment on your funeral. You try a wry smile, but it feels more like a grimace. Career advancement, you mutter to the empty room, the joke falling flat even to your own ears. The next morning, or perhaps it's later the same day, time has a habit of warping when existential dread is your new roommate. You're summoned again. This time, it's to a less public place, a dusty storeroom at the back of the guild hall, smelling faintly of old parchment and rat droppings. Master Albrecht is there, looking even more stressed than before, if that's possible. With him is a wiry, silent man who looks like he might have once been a leather tanner or a sailmaker, someone good with heavy-duty needle and thread. He doesn't meet your eyes. On a rough wooden table lies your new work attire. It's certainly a statement piece, though probably not one you'll be seeing on the runways of Milan, or whatever the medieval equivalent of high fashion is. First, there's the cloak. It's not just any cloak. It's a heavy, ankle-length affair, made of thick, dark canvas or perhaps leather, coated in a layer of what you suspect is scented wax. The idea, Master Albrecht explains with a distinct lack of enthusiasm, is that the smooth, waxy surface will prevent the pestilential humors from sticking to you. It feels incredibly stiff and unwieldy as you lift it. The weight surprising. You can already imagine how hot and suffocating it will be. A personal mobile sauna designed for misery. Fun! Then come the gloves, made of the same waxed material, reaching up to your elbows. Sensible, you suppose, if you're going to be touching. Well, best not to dwell on that just yet. A wide-brimmed hat is next, the kind often associated with men of learning or medicine. It's meant to signify your new, albeit terrifying, profession. It does little to make you feel professional, more like a child playing a very grim game of dress-up. And then, the centerpiece, the item that will forever define your image, transforming you from a person into a terrifying omen. The mask. It's something else. Fashioned from dark leather, it covers your entire head with round glass eyepieces that make you think of a giant, startled insect. And, of course, there's the beak. The infamous beak, protruding a good 6 inches from where your nose should be. It's this feature that gives the whole ensemble its nightmarish, bird-like quality. Master Albrecht explains, his voice muffled as he demonstrates by holding a similar, thankfully unused mask up to his own face, that the beak is to be filled with aromatic herbs. He gestures to a small pile of dried plants on the table. Thyme, mint, cloves, camphor, and something that smells vaguely like old socks mixed with potpourri. The mainstream historical understanding, you see, or at least the prevailing medical theory of your era, is that the plague, this terrifying pestilence, is spread by miasma, a noxious form of bad air emanating from rotting organic matter, or even from the breath of the afflicted. So, the logic goes, if you breathe in air filtered through these pungent herbs, you'll be protected. It's a fragrant fallacy, a perfumed shield against an invisible enemy, but it's all they've got. You'll later learn that some plague doctors, in more affluent areas or with more elaborate and expensive ideas, might have more exotic ingredients in their beaks, like ambergris, a waxy substance from whales, basically very fancy whale vomit, or laudanum-soaked sponges. A quirky tidbit for you. Laudanum, an opium tincture, might have made the smell more bearable, or just made the doctor too blissed out to care about the surrounding horror. As you begin to don this strange uniform, piece by piece, A profound sense of detachment washes over you. The heavy cloak settles on your shoulders like a physical manifestation of your new burden. The gloves make your hands feel clumsy, disconnected, and the mask, putting on the mask, is transformative. The world dims, seen now through two small, slightly distorting glass circles. Your peripheral vision is gone. The smell of the herbs inside the beak is overpowering. A cloying, sweetish, spicy aroma that fills your nostrils and the back of your throat. It's not entirely unpleasant, but it's also a constant reminder of why you're wearing this ridiculous, terrifying contraption. Your own breath sounds loud, echoing inside the leather confines, a forced intimacy with your own fear. You glance at your reflection in a murky, polished metal sheet leaning against a wall. The figure staring back is alien, a creature of nightmare. The sleek, dark silhouette, the expressionless glass eyes, the grotesque beak. It's no longer you. It's the plague doctor. This particular full-body getup, the bird-like mask and waxed gown, is something that became more widely documented and somewhat standardized around the 17th century, often attributed to the French physician Charles Delorme, who designed it in 1619 for treating plague victims. Earlier outbreaks, like the initial Black Death, saw physicians and attendants with less theatrical protection, if any. So, you're either in a slightly later period, or your town is an early adopter of cutting-edge, albeit terrifying, medical fashion. Finally, they hand you a wooden staff. It's a simple, long rod, not a wizard staff, more like a sturdy walking stick. Master Albrecht explains its uses. To point out areas needing attention, to examine patients from a slight distance without directly touching them, good luck with that, and, he adds with a grim little twitch of his lips, to help keep the more desperate or delirious patients, or even frightened townsfolk at bay. It's a tool of your trade, and also a subtle weapon of self-defense. Lovely. Standing there, fully encased, you feel a bead of sweat trickle down your back despite the coolness of the storeroom. It's hot inside this gear, and lonely. Historians still argue whether the full protective suit offered any genuine, measurable protection against the plague, which we now know was primarily spread by flea bites and respiratory droplets, not just general bad air, or if its primary effect was psychological. Did it reassure the populace to see someone ostensibly shielded and tackling the disease head-on, or did it simply terrify them further, marking the wearer as an extension of the plague itself? And what about the psychological effect on you, the wearer? Perhaps it's a barrier, a way to dehumanize yourself enough to face the horrors ahead. Or maybe it's just a very elaborate way to die feeling slightly more important and a lot more uncomfortable. You take a few clumsy steps, the cloak rustles stiffly. The world smells of camphors and impending doom. Your new life, it seems, has begun, and it already chafes. Fully encased in your new, rather alarming second skin, you feel Master Albrecht's slightly clammy hand on your arm, guiding you towards another smaller table. The silent, wiry man from before has already laid out an assortment of items, a kind of medieval starter pack for the aspiring, or more accurately, conscripted, plague doctor. This, you realize with a sinking feeling, is your toolkit. Your arsenal against the invisible tide of death. It doesn't exactly inspire confidence. If this collection of oddments were an army, it would be the one that surrenders before the first arrow is even knocked. First, there's a worn leather satchel, clearly seen better days, with a strap long enough to go across your body. It smells faintly of old leather, dust, and a curious metallic tang. Master Albrecht gestures towards it. Your instruments and remedies, he says, his voice still betraying that undercurrent of barely suppressed panic. Use them wisely. The emphasis on wisely feels less like advice and more like a disclaimer, as if to say, don't blame us if none of this actually works. No pressure then. You peer into the bag. Pride of place goes to a set of lancets. These small, sharp knives in various sizes gleam dully in the dim light. Their purpose is singular, and, in your era, utterly mainstream: bloodletting. For centuries, this has been a cornerstone of medical practice, all thanks to the ancient Greek theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The idea is that illness arises from an imbalance of these humors, and letting out a bit of excess blood can restore that balance. So, if someone is feverish, that's clearly too much blood, right? It sounds perfectly logical if you don't think about it too hard, or at all. You'll be expected to make precise incisions, often in the arm, to drain what is considered the corrupted or excessive humor. How much to take? Well, that's more art than science, often depending on the patient's perceived strength, or perhaps just how faint you, the doctor, are feeling that day. You imagine the patient satisfaction surveys for this procedure would be colorful. 1 star, fainted twice, still have the plague. Next to the lancets are several small sealed clay pots. These, Master Albrecht explains, contain various poultices and ointments. He picks one up, and the faint, earthy smell of damp herbs and something vaguely farm-like emanates from it. This one has dried frog and willow bark, he says, with an air of someone reciting a recipe they only half believe in. Good for drawing out the pestilential vapors from the boils. Dried frog, right. Other pots might contain mixtures of honey and bizarre herbs, or perhaps even less savory ingredients like pigeon droppings or snail slime, depending on local tradition and what old wives' tales are currently in vogue. The efficacy of smearing amphibian paste on a suppurating bubo is, shall we say, highly debatable. But in a world desperate for answers, any action feels better than none. There's also a large sponge and a flask of vinegar. Vinegar is your medieval hand sanitizer, disinfectant, and all-purpose miasma repellent. You'll be encouraged to wash your hands, over your gloves naturally, your instruments, and even dab your own mask and cloak with it. The sharp, acidic smell is actually a bit reassuring compared to the dubious perfume of the beak herbs, a clean scent in a world that often isn't. You might even be advised to hold a vinegar-soaked sponge to your, or the patient's nose, when in close proximity to the sick, an extra layer of olfactory defense. Then there's a collection of dried herbs, roots, and powders, wrapped in little cloth bundles. Some you recognize, chamomile, perhaps, or peppermint. Others are entirely alien. One particularly potent-smelling bundle is labeled, in a spidery script, theriac. This is the superstar of medieval cure-alls, a complex compound that could contain dozens, sometimes over 60, ingredients, including things like viper's flesh, opium, cinnamon, myrrh, and a whole host of other expensive and exotic components. The recipe for theriac was ancient, dating back to Roman times, and it was considered a powerful antidote to poisons and a general panacea. As a quirky tidbit, obtaining genuine, high-quality theriac was a serious business, with official public preparations in some cities to ensure its authenticity. Of course, its actual effectiveness against something like the plague was minimal, but the psychological boost of administering, or receiving, such a legendary and costly remedy was probably significant. Historians still argue whether the extensive pharmacopoeia of the medieval and early modern period, including complex recipes like theriac, represented genuine attempts at empirical treatment, with some accidental successes, or were more rooted in magical thinking and the powerful influence of the placebo effect. You suspect it's a healthy dose of the latter. Tucked into a side pocket of the satchel is a small, smooth stone with a hole through it, threaded onto a leather thong, an amulet. For protection, Master Albrecht mutters, almost sheepishly. The widow Hemlock swears by it. Because when evidence-based medicine fails you, a rock blessed by the local crone is clearly the next logical step. The line between medicine, superstition, and outright magic is blurry at best in your current reality. You'll likely encounter patients and families clinging to all sorts of charms, incantations, and religious relics, and you're in no position to dismiss any of it out of hand. Frankly, your frog paste isn't exactly sitting on the high ground of scientific rigor. Finally, there's a small bound notebook and a pot of ink with a sharpened quill. This, perhaps, is your most useful and somber tool. You will be expected to keep records, names, symptoms, dates of onset, and, all too often, dates of death. In some towns, plague doctors were one of the few official sources of such grim statistics. Your notes might help the council track the spread of the disease, or simply serve as a bleak accounting of the human cost. It's a heavy responsibility to be the chronicler of so much suffering. It also means you have to get close enough to ask questions and observe, something the rest of your kit seems designed to help you avoid. You pick up the satchel, it's not particularly heavy, but the weight of what it represents, the futility, the desperation, the sheer inadequacy of it all, feels immense. These are the weapons you have against an enemy that can decimate armies and topple kingdoms. A few sharp bits of metal, some questionable botanical gunk, a smelly sponge, and a notebook. It's like being asked to fight a dragon with a butter knife and a sternly worded letter. You try to project an air of competence for Master Albrecht's sake, and for your own rapidly dwindling morale. But as you sling the strap over your shoulder, the tools clinking softly within, you can't help but feel you're woefully, terrifyingly unprepared for what lies ahead. This isn't a doctor's kit. It's a collection of props for a tragedy. Master Albrecht gives a short, jerky nod, a clear dismissal. There's no pep talk, no good luck out there, champ. Just the silent, pressing urgency of a town holding its breath. You adjust the strap of your newly acquired satchel, its dubious contents clinking softly, a pathetic little sound in the grand scheme of things, with the heavy, waxed cloak rustling like a nest of very large, very stiff beetles, and the beak mask already making your face feel clammy. You push open the storeroom door and step out into the world, or what's left of it. The familiar street outside the Guildhall looks different, sharper, yet also more distant, viewed through the slightly distorting glass eyepieces of your mask. It's like looking at a poorly focused painting of a place you once knew. Your peripheral vision is non-existent, meaning you'll have to turn your entire head, beak and all, to take anything in. A maneuver that probably makes you look like a confused, oversized crow. Better make a mental note to watch out for low-hanging signs or errant children, if any are still brave enough to be out. Tripping in this getup wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be a full-blown production. The sounds are different too, muffled. Your own breathing is a constant, slightly ragged soundtrack inside the leather confines of the mask. The usual hubbub of the town, the chatter, the laughter, the arguments over the price of fish, is gone, replaced by an unnerving silence, punctuated by the occasional distant cough, a shutter banging in the wind, or the mournful tolling of a church bell that seems to be keeping a very busy schedule these days. Your heavy, waxed cloak whispers and sighs with every movement, a constant companion to your solitude. And the smell. Oh, the smell. Your beak is packed with that pungent potpourri of thyme, cloves and camphor, an aromatic assault on your senses meant to keep the dreaded miasma at bay. It's so strong, it almost makes your eyes water. But even through this herbal barrage, the foul air of the plague-stricken town manages to intrude. Whiffs of wood smoke, acrid and heavy, catch at the back of your throat. This isn't the comforting smell of hearth fires, but the desperate smoke of pyres, or perhaps bonfires lit in the streets. People believe that fire purifies the air, chasing away the invisible, pestilential clouds. As a quirky tidbit, it wasn't just sweet-smelling woods like juniper or pine people were burning. In their desperation, some communities resorted to burning anything with a strong odor. Sulfur, arsenic, which is just trading one invisible killer for another, really. Old leather shoes, even heaps of pungent goat hair. The idea was that one strong smell could drive out the other strong smell, the miasma. It's the medieval equivalent of fighting fire with Well, with smellier fire. You start to walk, your staff tapping lightly on the cobblestones, more for balance and a sense of presence than anything else. The streets are eerily empty. Shops are shuttered, windows dark. It's as if the whole town is cowering indoors, hiding from the invisible monster that stalks the alleyways. The few people you do see scurry away at your approach, a mixture of fear and perhaps a strange, morbid curiosity in their eyes. Mothers pull their children close, shielding their faces. Men cross the street, their own handkerchiefs pressed to their noses, often soaked in vinegar or their own preferred aromatic concoctions. You are a walking embodiment of the plague itself, a terrifying portent. Your new fan club is enthusiastic, just not in the way you'd normally want. This is where the miasma theory truly reigns supreme in your mind and in the actions of everyone around you. You find yourself instinctively avoiding puddles of stagnant water, piles of refuse in the gutters, which, let's be honest, were probably there long before the plague, medieval sanitation not being a top priority. Or even areas where the wind seems to blow from a particularly suspect direction, like the tannery district or the overcrowded poorer quarters. Every foul odor is a potential threat, every unusual atmospheric condition a sign. The very air is your enemy. As you venture deeper into the town, you begin to see the stark signs of the plague's presence. Some doors are marked with a hastily painted cross, often in red chalk or paint, a grim marker indicating that the pestilence resides within. Sometimes the words, "Lord have mercy upon us," are scrawled beneath. This practice of marking infected houses was a chillingly effective, if brutal, public health measure in many European cities during major outbreaks, particularly from the 16th century onwards, essentially sealing the fate of those within. Seeing that cross sends a fresh wave of apprehension through you. Behind those doors are the sick, the dying, the people you are now honor-bound, or at least contractually obligated, to attend. The sun climbs higher, and it's getting noticeably hot inside your waxed canvas personal sauna. Sweat pricks at your forehead and trickles down your back. The glass eyepieces are beginning to fog up with your breath, further obscuring your view. This whole outfit, while looking impressively intimidating, or impressively ridiculous depending on your perspective, is not exactly designed for comfort or practicality. It's a far cry from the breathable, high-tech PPE of future centuries. You're basically a walking, sweating miasma filter with a pointy stick. Historians still argue whether the widespread public bonfires lit during plague epidemics had any minor beneficial effect by accidentally deterring rats or fleas, the real culprits in spreading the bubonic plague, though you don't know that, or if their impact was purely psychological, a visible sign that something was being done against the pervasive, invisible miasma. Looking at the plumes of smoke rising from various points in the town, you can certainly attest to the visible sign part. Whether it's doing anything else is anyone's guess. Right now, it just adds to the general oppressive atmosphere. You're not sure where you're supposed to go initially. Perhaps to a designated house, or maybe you're just meant to patrol these desolate streets like a morbid sentinel, waiting for a cry for help, or for someone brave enough to approach the Birdman. The weight of your useless kit, the heat of your protective gear, and the sheer dread of what's to come press down on you. Every shadow seems to harbor the disease. Every gust of wind feels like it could carry your doom. This is your new world. A landscape of fear, filtered through glass and scented herbs, walked in heavy boots towards an unknown, but almost certainly unpleasant destination. Your first steps as a plague doctor are tentative, clumsy, and utterly terrifying. Your solitary, unnerving patrol through the unnervingly silent streets doesn't last forever. Sooner or later, the reason for your strange new employment must make itself known. Perhaps a desperate cry echoes from a narrow alleyway, or a child, braver or more terrified than the adults, runs out to tug at your heavy cloak, their small face streaked with tears and grime, babbling about a sick parent. Or maybe, more prosaically, a runner from the guild hall finds you, panting and wide-eyed, with a hastily scrawled note giving you an address. Your first official call. However it happens, the moment arrives, and your staff suddenly feels less like a theatrical prop and more like a very flimsy shield as you're guided towards a darkened doorway, one that probably doesn't have a welcome mat, let alone a 5-star rating on Medieval Yelp. You push open the creaking wooden door, your beak mask preceding you like a bizarre avian herald of doom. The air inside the small, cramped dwelling is thick and heavy, a palpable miasma of sickness, unwashed bodies, and despair. It's a smell that even the aggressive potpourri in your beak can't entirely vanquish. It just layers itself on top, creating a uniquely dreadful perfume. The light is dim, filtering in through a single grimy window or perhaps just the open door behind you. As your eyes adjust, you see figures huddled in the shadows. The family. Their faces are a mixture of raw hope and utter terror as they behold your strange, inhuman form. You are the plague doctor, an ambivalent angel of mercy and death, all rolled into one terrifying package. Their whispers cease as you enter, and a heavy silence falls, broken only by a low, distressed moaning from a pallet in the corner. That's your patient. Stepping closer, your waxed cloak rustling with a sound that seems deafening in the oppressive quiet you see them. It could be a man, a woman, even a child. The plague is terribly indiscriminate. They are flushed with a raging fever, their skin hot to the touch, even if you only hover your gloved hand near. Their eyes might be wild and delirious, or dull and unseeing. Shivers rack their body despite the heat they radiate. This is the onset, the swift and brutal invasion. But it's the telltale signs, the true hallmarks of this particular pestilence, the bubonic plague, that draw your reluctant, fearful gaze. There in the groin, or perhaps the armpit, or on the neck, is the swelling. The bubo, a hard, painful lump, sometimes growing to the size of an egg or even an apple, marking the overwhelmed lymph node where the body is desperately and failingly fighting the infection. The skin over it is often stretched taut, sometimes turning a lurid purplish black, hence the name that will terrify generations, the Black Death. The patient may cry out if you so much as look like you're going to touch it. The pain, you understand, is excruciating. This isn't just a swelling. It's a siege battery of the illness, a visible sign of the body's internal war. You remember the contents of your dubious kit. The lancets. Some physicians, you've heard, advocate for lancing these buboes, making an incision to release the vile humors or pus within. Others argue it only hastens death or spreads the contagion. You, with your limited or non-existent training, hesitate. The thought of cutting into that swollen, angry flesh with a small, cold knife while the patient thrashes and screams is unappealing, to say the least. Perhaps you try to apply one of your pre-prepared poultices instead, the one with dried frog and willow bark, remember? You smear the gritty, strange-smelling paste onto a piece of linen and gently, or as gently as you can in your clumsy gloves, place it over the bubo. The patient barely registers it, lost in their fever dream. It feels like putting a very small, very silly sticking plaster on a volcano. The family watches your every move with desperate intensity. Do they see a healer or just a harbinger? You try to project an air of calm professionalism, which is difficult when you're sweating profusely inside a bird mask, and your primary medical intervention involves amphibian residue. You might murmur some supposedly comforting words, but they're muffled by your mask, probably sounding more like ominous croaks. Your bedside manner is going to need some work, assuming anyone you treat lives long enough to complain. As the hours or even just minutes pass, the patient's condition can deteriorate with shocking speed. The fever might spike further. Dark spots called petechia, caused by bleeding under the skin, might appear on their body. Another grim sign. Their breathing becomes shallow and rapid. Sometimes there's a dreadful sweetish, fetid odor that seems to cling to them, the smell of the plague itself. It's a relentless, horrifying progression. You might offer a sip of water or a spoonful of some herbal concoction from your kit, knowing deep down it's utterly futile. It's a grim thought, but you recall hearing some quirky, almost fringe beliefs about how one could avoid the plague. Some say that maintaining a cheerful disposition and avoiding fear or grief were key, as if the plague were a cosmic bully that preyed on the emotionally vulnerable. Imagine trying to tell this weeping family to cheer up, it might save you. Others held even stranger notions for treating the buboes themselves, whispering of applying a live, split-open pigeon to the swelling until the bird died, supposedly drawing out the poison. You eye your frog poultice. Suddenly, it doesn't seem quite so outlandish in comparison, which is a rather depressing realization about the state of your current medical knowledge. You find yourself thinking about the advice often given by learned physicians, advice that's now being whispered frantically among those with the means. Cito, long, tardy, flee quickly, go far, return slowly. Historians still argue whether this was primarily a pragmatic, if stark, piece of public health wisdom, recognizing the contagious nature of the disease, or if it was simply an option available only to the wealthy, a way for them to escape while the poor were left to face the pestilence. Looking at this family, trapped in this small, dark room with their dying loved one, you know that fleeing is a luxury they cannot afford. Your presence here, however useless, is all they have. This first encounter is a brutal awakening. The theoretical horrors you imagined are now vividly, sickeningly real. The abstract fear has a face, a sound, a smell. The weight of your inadequacy presses down on you, heavier than your waxed cloak. Your grand uniform, your beak full of herbs, your satchel of questionable remedies. They are all a mockery in the face of such overwhelming suffering. You are not a healer. You are a witness. A poorly equipped, terrified witness. And as you watch the life fade from your first patient, or as you're forced to retreat, promising to return, a promise that tastes like ash in your mouth, you understand the true, harsh reality of your new role. The bedside horrors have only just begun to unfold. The image of that first patient, the fevered skin, the dark, swollen bubo, the sheer animal terror in their eyes, it replays in your mind's eye constantly now. It's your new, unwelcome lullaby as you try to find moments of rest in your likely sparse and isolated lodgings. After those initial harrowing encounters at the bedsides of the dying, the abstract nature of your agreement with the town council crystallizes into a very sharp, very uncomfortable reality. This isn't just a job, it's a sentence. You are now officially theirs, a cog in their desperate, creaking machine of plague response. You recall the meeting with Master Albrecht and the other councilmen. Perhaps it was before you donned the suit, or maybe in a hurried, hushed conversation after your first few grim visits. They would have laid out the terms, the contract, though it probably wasn't written on fancy parchment with gold leaf. More likely, it was a verbal agreement, underscored by the weight of their desperation and the clink of that initial bag of coins. The details are important because they define the gilded cage you now inhabit. You are to attend to the sick, all the sick, regardless of their station or ability to pay you personally. This was a common stipulation for municipally hired plague doctors. Their services were for the community, a grim public utility. No picking and choosing the pleasant plague cases if such a thing could even exist. There are likely other clauses, spoken or unspoken. You are probably forbidden from leaving the town walls until the council deems the crisis over, or until you, succumb yourself. Desertion would mean forfeiting any outstanding pay, and likely being branded a coward or worse, potentially hunted down if their fear and anger got the better of them. Your life isn't entirely your own anymore. You might also be restricted in your interactions with the healthy populace. This is a quirky but sensible tidbit that often featured in such arrangements. To prevent you, the person most likely to be carrying the seeds of the plague, or at least its miasma, from inadvertently spreading it. You might be barred from entering markets, inns, unless one is specifically set aside for you, which is doubtful, or even churches during general services. You become a ghost in your own town, seen only when disaster strikes. Your social life, needless to say, is about to take a nosedive. Good luck finding a +1 for the annual turnip festival, looking like a giant, ominous bird. And then there's the coin, the payment. It might be a regular stipend, or perhaps a lump sum promised at the end of your service, if you survive. Historians still argue whether the salaries offered to plague doctors, often significantly higher than those of other physicians or an average skilled worker of the time, were a true reflection of the extreme danger involved and the high mortality rate among them, or if they also indicated the sheer desperation of civic authorities and the profound scarcity of individuals, sane or otherwise, willing to take on such a terrifying role. It's probably a bit of both. That money, when it does come, feels heavy. Each coin seems tainted, earned through proximity to suffering and death. When you do have to spend it, you might notice merchants hesitate to take it directly from your gloved hand, perhaps asking you to place it on the counter so they can then scoop it up, maybe even douse it in vinegar later. So much for feeling like a high roller. Despite your official employment, respect from the general populace is, as the saying goes, far from guaranteed. In fact, condemnation is often closer to the mark. While some desperate families might greet you with a flicker of hope, many more see you as a walking omen of death. As you trudge through the streets in your bird-like attire, whispers follow you like your own shadow. Doors slam shut. People make warding signs or clutch their own amulets tighter. Children who once might have pointed with curiosity now hide, or worse, mimic the fear of their parents, perhaps even throwing stones or insults from a safe distance. You're not just the doctor. In their minds, you're an extension of the plague itself, tainted by your constant association with it. You're doing the council's bidding, yes, but you're also doing the one job nobody else wants, and that association sticks to you like the waxy coating on your cloak. It's a lonely, thankless position. Your PR department consists of, well, just you and your pointy stick. Your interactions with the council members themselves can be a strange dance. They hired you. They need you. But that doesn't mean they like having you around. Meetings, if they occur, are likely brief, held in well-ventilated rooms, or even outdoors, with them positioned at a considerable distance. They'll want reports. How many sick today? How many dead? Are the measures working? Everyone knows the measures aren't really working, but the question must be asked. They might be outwardly courteous, but their eyes betray their fear. You are their necessary evil, their gamble against annihilation, and they are likely counting the days until they no longer require your unsettling services. You might even sense a power dynamic. You have a skill, or at least a willingness they desperately need, but they hold the purse strings and the authority. It's a precarious balance. You half expect them to slide your pay across the floor with a long stick. Sometimes you're also the bearer of bad news they don't want to hear, or the enforcer of rules they'd rather not take direct responsibility for, like confirming a house needs to be sealed. This doesn't exactly win you any popularity contests, not with the council, and certainly not with the poor souls trapped inside. The contract binds you to these grim tasks. The coin provides a grim incentive, but the condemnation is the daily bread of your new existence. You are a pariah on the payroll, a vital yet reviled figure. The weight of their fear, their blame, their desperate hope, it all settles on your cloaked shoulders, adding to the physical discomfort of your uniform. It's a heavy burden, this strange blend of civic duty and social leprosy. Another day, another doorway marked with that grim, chalky cross. Or perhaps no cross at all yet, just a house heavy with the silence of held breaths and the stifled sobs that signal your services are, once again, required. Your heavy cloak, now starting to bear the faint but indelible stains and smells of your grim profession, settles around you like a shroud as you duck into yet another dimly lit, fear-saturated room. The satchel of remedies at your hip feels less like a toolkit and more like a bag of well-intentioned deceptions. The remedies of yesteryear, you're quickly learning, are mostly a collection of strange concoctions and unsettling procedures, almost all of which will culminate in very little actual success. You approach the pallet where your next patient lies. The family, if they haven't fled or succumbed themselves, watches you with that familiar, unnerving blend of hope and dread. What magic will the Birdman attempt today? You reach into your bag. Perhaps you start with a potion? You might have a selection of these, brewed according to ancient recipes or the council's specific instructions. Imagine a dark, viscous liquid, smelling strongly of vinegar, honey, and a dozen other unidentifiable herbs, some bitter, some cloyingly sweet. This could be an attempt to rebalance the humors, a core tenet of medical understanding for centuries. Mainstream historical fact. According to humoral theory, if the plague was causing a hot and dry imbalance, you'd administer things considered cold and moist, and vice versa. This often extended to prescribing emetics or purgatives, concoctions designed to make the patient vomit or have diarrhea, to violently expel the supposed corrupted humors. You might offer this to your patient, trying to coax them to sip it, knowing full well it's more likely to cause further distress than any actual healing. Drink this, it'll realign your internal fluids, you might say, the explanation sounding flimsy even to your own muffled ears. The 5-second rule probably doesn't apply to its ingredients. Then there are the poultices. Oh, the poultices. Remember that delightful dried frog and willow bark mixture from your initial kit? You've probably got a whole range of these now. Perhaps one made from onions and figs, another from mustard seed and pigeon droppings. A surprisingly common ingredient in historical remedies, believed to draw out toxins. You carefully smear the chosen glop onto a piece of linen. The texture might be lumpy, slimy, or unpleasantly sticky under your gloved fingers. Applying it to a raging bubo is an exercise in itself. The patient might scream, or be too far gone to react. You try to look confident, as if this particular blend of agricultural waste and kitchen scraps is the very pinnacle of medical science. The family watches, desperate for any sign that this time, this application, will be the one that works. Spoiler alert, it rarely is. And the procedures. These are often the most unsettling part of your day. Bloodletting is, of course, of frequent demand. You unsheathe your lancet, its polished surface reflecting the dim light. You look for a suitable vein on an already frail arm. The theory is sound by medieval standards, but the practice is messy and often weakens the patient further. How much blood to let? Enough to relieve the pressure, but not so much that they expire on the spot from your intervention. It's a horrifyingly fine line, drawn with a sharp knife and a prayer. You're becoming quite adept at this, though adept feels like the wrong word for ritualized exsanguination with no discernible benefit. Sometimes, if a bubo is particularly large and seems ripe, you might be pressured by the family, or even by your own desperate desire to do something, to lance it. This is not for the faint of heart. The stench that can be released is overpowering, even through your herb-filled mask. The patient's reaction, if they are conscious, is one of pure agony. And what then? You might try to cauterize the wound with a heated metal instrument, another layer of torment. Or apply more strange ointments, hoping to prevent, well, whatever comes next. It often feels like you're just making their suffering more elaborate. Your medieval medical degree might as well be in advanced guesswork and ritualized torment. You might even be expected to engage in practices bordering on sympathetic magic, a quirky tidbit of the era's medical landscape. Perhaps a council member hearing a rumor from a distant town insists you try to transfer the sickness. This could involve placing a live animal, like a chicken, on the patient's chest, believing it will absorb the pestilence, or writing specific charms or biblical verses on slips of parchment and having the patient swallow them or binding them to their limbs. You might even be encouraged to wear a specific, rather uncomfortable amulet yourself, say, a large, oddly shaped lodestone that a local wise woman swore would protect the wearer, but mostly just bangs annoyingly against your ribs as you walk. You go through the motions because refusal is not an option, and because, in this terrifying abyss of the unknown, who's to say what won't work when nothing does? The sheer, unrelenting lack of success is the heaviest burden. Despite all your strange concoctions, your unsettling procedures, your vinegar washes, and herbal beak stuffings, the patients mostly die. Sometimes quickly, sometimes after days of agonizing decline. Each death is a fresh stab of failure, a confirmation of your own impotence. You record their names in your little notebook, the ink blots like tiny tombstones. Historians still argue whether the detailed regimens prescribed by physicians of this era, involving not just these hands-on treatments, but also complex dietary advice. Eat this, not that. Specific behavioral changes, avoid south-facing windows, don't bathe too often, and multi-ingredient concoctions provided any actual physiological benefit, or if their main value lay in giving patients and their families a sense of agency and structured care in an otherwise chaotic and terrifying situation. Watching another family weep. You suspect it's mostly the latter. You are providing the ritual of medicine, even if the results are consistently, tragically, the same. The side effects of your treatments, you sometimes think with a touch of black humor, must be listed somewhere in invisible ink. May cause despair, false hope, and a lingering smell of questionable poultry. There's certainly no money-back guarantee on these remedies of yesteryear. Yet, you continue. You mix another foul potion. You apply another bizarre poultice. You offer what little comfort your terrifying avian visage can provide. Because what else is there to do? You are the plague doctor. And this is your strange, unsettling, and largely unsuccessful craft. The grim routine of your days settles into a rhythm of dread, dubious remedies, and the ever-present rustle of your waxed cloak. But your life as a plague doctor isn't just confined to the dim, fetid rooms of the dying. You must also navigate the world outside those sickbeds, the streets of this terrified town, and it's here that the full weight of your peculiar social standing becomes a palpable force. You are an object of both intense fear and, paradoxically, desperate hope. Every foray into public view is an exercise in observing the subtle and not-so-subtle dance of whispers and wary glances. Imagine yourself walking down what was once a bustling thoroughfare. Now, it's sparsely populated, but your distinctive silhouette, the bird-like mask and somber cloak, acts like an invisible force field. People melt away. Conversations cease abruptly. Heads turn, some with morbid curiosity, others with outright hostility. Many simply averting their gaze as if eye contact itself could transmit the pestilence. Mothers clutch their children, pulling them into doorways, their faces pale. Men who might have once offered a gruff greeting now give you a wide berth, often crossing to the other side of the street, their own hands instinctively going to their mouths, perhaps clutching a pomander or a vinegar-soaked cloth. You're not saying you're unpopular, but even the town's mangy dogs seem to give you a wider berth than usual. Social distancing. You're the unwilling medieval pioneer. The whispers are constant, a sibilant soundtrack to your public appearances. You can't always make out the words, muffled as your hearing is by your mask, and the general determination of people not to be heard by you. But you can guess the sentiment. It's the death bringer, some might murmur. Don't let his shadow fall on you, others might caution, a quirky tidbit of local superstition holding that even your shadow could be tainted. You hear shutters creaking closed as you pass by certain houses, a clear message of not welcome here. It's a stark reminder that, while the council pays your wage, the populace largely views you as a necessary evil, a walking memento mori they'd rather not encounter. Getting basic necessities, like food, becomes a carefully orchestrated procedure. You can't just browse the market stalls, haggling over the price of bread or cheese. Perhaps a designated person, maybe a nervous apprentice from the guild hall, or a heavily veiled member of a religious order, leaves a basket of provisions for you at an agreed-upon spot, ensuring no direct contact. Or maybe one brave or ostracized shopkeeper is willing to serve you, money left on a designated stone, goods collected after they have retreated to a safe distance. It's all very transactional, stripped of any human warmth. You sometimes wonder if they boil the coins you leave behind. Probably. Yet, amidst this pervasive fear, there's the other side of the coin, desperate hope. The very people who might have crossed the street to avoid you yesterday can change their tune with terrifying speed when the plague strikes their own household. Suddenly, your ominous figure is the one they search for frantically. You'll see them, eyes wide with panic, running towards you, their earlier aversion forgotten. "Doctor, please, my son, my wife." The pleas are raw, heart-wrenching. In these moments, you are no longer just the feared birdman. You are their last, flimsy lifeline. Their wary glances transform into pleading stares, their whispers into desperate cries for help. This rapid switch is dizzying, a constant reminder of the precariousness of life and the thin veneer of societal norms in the face of existential threat. This duality is exhausting. One moment you are a pariah, the next a reluctant savior. There is no middle ground. The historical fact is that during widespread epidemics, fear and suspicion were rampant. Strangers, outsiders, and anyone associated with the disease, including those trying to treat it, often faced ostracism or worse. Marginalized communities were frequently scapegoated. You, in your conspicuous attire, are a walking target for these anxieties. You represent everything they fear, and yet, you also represent the only official response, the only sliver of mostly false hope that something, anything, can be done. Sometimes you might even be approached with strange requests or advice born of sheer desperation and folklore. A woman might press a bizarrely shaped root into your gloved hand, swearing it kept her cousin alive in the last outbreak. Another might beg you to recite a specific prayer over her child, one she heard from a traveling friar, believed to have special potency. You listen, you nod, you sometimes even incorporate these desperate measures if they seem harmless enough, because who are you to deny any perceived comfort in this maelstrom of suffering? Historians still argue whether the extreme social measures taken during plagues, such as strict quarantines and the almost ritualistic shunning of the sick and their attendants, were driven more by a rational, though often imperfect and evolving, understanding of contagion and a desire to protect the community, or if they were largely fueled by panic, pre-existing social prejudices, and a need to find tangible targets for an intangible fear. Watching the faces around you, you suspect it's a messy, uncomfortable combination of all those things. You are both a tool of their rational response and a victim of their irrational panic. Your lodgings, likely isolated and basic, offer little respite. There's no one to share a meal with, no friendly conversation to lighten the oppressive weight of your daily experiences. You are profoundly alone, an island of miasma-fighting herbs and grim knowledge in a sea of fear. The few interactions you have are strained, professional, or soaked in despair. The constant scrutiny, the whispers, the wary glances, the sudden switches from revulsion to desperate need. It all erodes your sense of self. You are becoming the mask. You are the plague doctor. And it is a lonely, unsettling existence, navigating this tightrope walk between being the most feared and, occasionally, the most sought-after person in town. Your fan mail, if you ever received any, would likely be a very mixed bag indeed. Your days are already a grim tapestry woven with sickness and the shadows of death. But a new, even colder thread is about to be introduced into the pattern. It's one thing to administer your strange poultices and bitter draughts to those already in the plague's grip. It's quite another to become an agent of their confinement, an enforcer of isolation. After identifying a household where the pestilence has taken root, your duty, as outlined in that heavy contract with the town council, extends beyond simply attempting to treat the afflicted. You must now play a part in sealing their fate, quite literally. Quarantine's cold embrace is about to extend, and you're the one holding the metaphorical key, or at least pointing out which door needs to be locked. The process usually begins after you've made your grim assessment. You emerge from a stricken home, the smell of sickness clinging to your waxed cloak, the faces of the family etched with fresh grief or dawning horror. Your next stop is often the guild hall or a designated magistrate to report your findings. There, in a hushed formal exchange, you confirm the presence of the plague. This confirmation sets in motion a brutal, yet tragically common, civic response. You might not swing the hammer yourself, but your word is the warrant. You're becoming a sort of medieval home confinement specialist, and the reviews for your service are uniformly terrible. Soon after, you might find yourself accompanying the town guard, or a grim-faced carpenter hired for this specific, unenviable task, back to the unfortunate house. Your presence lends a grim officialdom to the proceedings. The family inside, already grappling with illness, now faces a new terror, being walled up sometimes with the sick and the healthy trapped together. The historical reality is stark. During plague outbreaks, entire households were commonly shut up for an extended period, often 40 days. The origin of the word quarantine from the Italian quaranta giorni. This wasn't a comfortable stay-at-home order with streaming services. It was a potential death sentence for everyone inside, healthy or not. The scenes that unfold are heart-wrenching. As the guards take their positions and the carpenter prepares his tools, pleas and cries erupt from within. Faces, pale and terrified, appear at the windows, begging for mercy, for a reconsideration. "But my other children are still healthy," a mother might scream, her voice cracking with despair. "You can't leave us in here to die with him," a desperate husband might plead. You stand there, a silent, cloaked figure, your staff perhaps held a little tighter. What can you say? Your beak mask hides your expression, which is probably for the best. It absorbs your own muffled sighs of helplessness. You are the face of an unyielding, impersonal policy. Sometimes the resistance is more physical. People might try to barricade the door from the inside or attempt to flee. The guards, often hardened or simply frightened themselves, deal with this grimly. Then comes the sound of hammering as boards are nailed across the door, shutters are secured from the outside. Each thud of the hammer feels like a nail in their collective coffin. It's a sound that will echo in your nightmares. A small opening might be left, through which meager rations of food and water could be passed, or sometimes not even that. Once sealed, a red or black cross is often painted on the door, perhaps with the chilling words, "Lord have mercy upon us," a public declaration of the prison within. You might also encounter figures known as searchers of the dead or viewers of the sick. This quirky and often grim occupation was frequently filled by older women, perhaps believed to be immune due to previous exposure, or simply deemed more expendable by the patriarchal society. Their job was to enter homes to confirm plague cases or deaths, often before you were even called, or to keep a tally of the deceased. Your roles might overlap, or you might have to confer with these stoic, often shunned women, comparing notes on the spread of the illness from street to street. They, like you, walk a lonely path, privy to the city's deepest sorrows. The air in a street with several quarantined houses becomes thick with a unique kind of dread. An unnatural silence reigns, broken only by the occasional muffled cry from within a sealed home, the bored coughing of a guard, or the rustle of wind through deserted alleyways. It's a visible, tangible manifestation of the town's fear. Historians still argue whether the widespread implementation of household quarantine, despite its devastating and often cruel impact on individual families and the high likelihood of all within becoming infected, was ultimately effective in significantly slowing the overall spread of plague in densely populated urban environments, or if its main function was to create a visible, albeit brutal, display of civic control and a desperate attempt to do something. Observing the haphazard nature of it, the houses sealed too late, the guards who might be bribed, you have your own doubts about its efficacy, but you keep those doubts well hidden behind your impassive mask. This new dimension to your role does little for your already shaky public image. Before, you were a feared omen who poked at people with strange instruments. Now, you are also seen as the one who points the finger, the one who effectively condemns families to a slow, terrifying wait for the inevitable. The desperate hope you sometimes saw in people's eyes when they called for your healing skills might now be tinged with a deeper resentment when they see you in the context of quarantine enforcement. The cold embrace of isolation you help impose only chills your own interactions further. You can't exactly expect a thank you note from a family you've just helped to imprison. Perhaps the council will send a fruit basket. Unlikely. You try to tell yourself it's necessary, a harsh measure for a harsh time. You try to believe it's for the greater good, to protect the rest of the town. But each time you witness a door being boarded up, each time you hear the wails of those trapped inside, a small piece of your own humanity feels like it's being chipped away. You are becoming an instrument of policy, a cog in a machine that processes sorrow. The weight of these sealed fates is a heavy addition to your already burdened conscience. As you continue your grim rounds, navigating streets silenced by fear and houses sealed by civic decree, you become acutely aware of another ever-present force attempting to battle the pestilence: faith. In a world where science offers little more than your dubious frog poultices and bloodletting, the church stands as a formidable, if increasingly strained, bastion against the encroaching darkness. Its bells toll almost constantly, a mournful symphony accompanying the prayers that rise from every home, every chapel, every street corner where a few desperate souls might gather. But alongside organized religion, a vibrant undercurrent of folk magic and deeply ingrained superstitions also flourishes, a testament to humanity's desperate need to find meaning and protection in the face of overwhelming, inexplicable suffering. And you, with your beak mask and satchel of questionable cures, find yourself somewhere in the murky middle, your own practices often feeling like they border on the very superstitions you observe. The church's response is visible everywhere. You see processions of priests and monks, their voices hoarse from chanting litanies, parading holy relics through the town square. From a safe distance, of course. They implore God for mercy, for an end to this divine punishment, for the plague is widely interpreted as just that, a scourge sent by an angry deity to chastise a sinful populace. Sermons, if you happen to overhear them, perhaps shouted from a church doorway to a sparsely gathered, fearful flock, speak of repentance, of the need for prayer and penance. This historical fact is well documented. During the Black Death and subsequent outbreaks, religious fervor intensified dramatically. Public prayers, days of fasting, and even extreme acts of penance like those of the flagellants, groups of people who would whip themselves publicly to atone for the sins of mankind, became common sights in some regions, a desperate spectacle of collective guilt and hope for divine intervention. Your interactions with the local clergy are likely complex. Some priests, witnessing your tireless, if largely futile, efforts, might offer a grudging nod of respect, seeing you as another soul toiling in the face of God's mysterious will. Others might view your medical attempts with suspicion, seeing them as a distraction from the true path to salvation through faith alone, or worse, as meddling in affairs best left to the divine. They offer prayers and the sacraments, particularly last rites for the dying. Though even that sacred duty becomes fraught with peril for the priests themselves, many of whom succumb to the plague caught while ministering to their flock. You offer what you can, which often isn't much more effective than their prayers, just messier. It's not exactly a rivalry, more like two different departments in the same failing enterprise of plague management. Beyond the formal church, folk magic is rampant. You see it in the amulets clutched in sweaty hands, the strange symbols chalked on doorways, sometimes right next to the official quarantine cross. The bizarre rituals whispered about in hushed tones. People hang bundles of herbs, not your medical ones, but others reputed to have protective magical properties, over their lintels. They might burn specific kinds of incense, not for the miasma, but to ward off evil spirits believed to carry the sickness. You hear tales of wise women or local healers offering charms made from raven feathers, wolf's teeth, or a bewildering array of equally unlikely components. A quirky tidbit from the era is the fervent devotion to specific plague saints, like Saint Roch, often depicted with a plague bubo on his leg and accompanied by a dog, or Saint Sebastian, shot through with arrows. Tiny, hand-carved effigies of these saints are treasured, and desperate prayers are directed to them for personal intercession. Families might place these little figures at the bedside of the sick, their last hope resting on a small piece of painted wood. And where do your own practices fit in this? If you're honest with yourself, as you crush herbs for another useless poultice, or mumble incantations taught to you by an old apothecary, the line between your medicine and their superstition feels increasingly blurry. Are your waxed cloak and herb-filled beak truly based on sound medical principle? Or are they just a more elaborate, officially sanctioned amulet? When you advise a family to burn rosemary in the sick room, is it for its supposed miasma-clearing properties, or because there's a local belief that rosemary wards off evil? Desperation is a powerful solvent, capable of dissolving the already thin boundaries between nascent science, folklore, and outright magical thinking. You might even find yourself incorporating some local superstition into your routine, if only to give a moment's comfort or a sense of participation to a grieving family. Yes, you might find yourself saying, "Let's ensure the window is open to the east when the cock crows," just as your grandmother advised. It probably won't help, but it won't hurt either. And in this sea of failure, any port in a storm, however flimsy, feels worth considering. The overwhelming, soul-crushing truth, however, is the grand collective failure of it all. The prayers, the processions, the flagellations, the magical charms, your theriac, your lancing, your vinegar washes, none of it stops the tide. People continue to sicken and die with horrifying regularity. This relentless failure breeds a spectrum of reactions. For some, it deepens their faith, convinced that more fervent prayer or greater penance is required. For others, a creeping disillusionment sets in. Historians still argue whether the perceived failure of the Church to stop the plague through spiritual means significantly weakened its authority in the long term, paving the way for more secular viewpoints and the eventual rise of scientific inquiry, or if, in many areas, it ultimately reinforced faith by framing the pestilence as an unfathomable divine mystery, urging greater piety and acceptance of God's will. You, caught in the daily grind of confronting this failure head-on, might find your own beliefs, whatever they were, tested to their limits. The church bells toll, the people pray, the charms are clutched, and your remedies are applied, all under the shadow of the plague's indifferent scythe. You're all in this together, priest, peasant, and plague doctor, dabbling in your respective comforts, be they holy water or powdered frog, and finding them all wanting. Divine intervention, if it's coming, certainly seems to be taking its sweet, agonizing time, perhaps stuck in celestial traffic. The air is thick not just with miasma and incense, but with unanswered prayers and the bitter taste of collective impotence. Your solitary path through the plague-stricken town, marked by the rustle of your waxed cloak and the scent of your beak's herbal stuffing, occasionally intersects with the paths of others who also call themselves healers. In these desperate times, anyone with a theory, a tincture, or simply enough audacity can claim to offer a solution to the pestilence. Navigating this landscape of fellow practitioners, ranging from aloof, university-trained physicians to opportunistic charlatans hawking snake oil, is yet another layer to the harsh reality of your existence. It's a veritable marketplace of medieval medicine, and the customers are, quite literally, dying for a cure. One day, perhaps emerging from a house where your efforts have once again proven futile, you might encounter a learned physician. These are the men who have actually studied at a university, read Hippocrates and Galen, or at least summaries of them, and can probably discourse at length in Latin about the imbalances of the four humors. The historical fact is that the medical field had a distinct hierarchy. These physici were theoretically at the top, though their actual effectiveness was often no better than anyone else's. This physician, if he hasn't already fled to his country estate, a common tactic for those who could afford it, might observe you from a safe distance, perhaps stroking his well-trimmed beard. His own attire might be rich, certainly cleaner than yours, and he likely wouldn't dream of entering an infected house himself. Instead, he might offer pronouncements, perhaps diagnosing patients based on second-hand accounts, or if he's feeling particularly brave, by scrutinizing a flask of their urine from across a room. This practice, uroscopies or water casting, is a quirky tidbit of the era's diagnostics. Some practitioners possessed elaborate charts depicting dozens of urine colors and consistencies, each linked to a specific malady. They'd hold the flask to the light, swirl it with a knowing air, and then declare the nature of the imbalance, often with an impressive display of jargon that left the patient's family bewildered, but vaguely impressed. You might overhear him advising a distraught family member to procure some expensive, imported herbs or to ensure the patient is only exposed to air from the north. His condescending tone might suggest he views you, the town's salaried plague doctor, as little more than a necessary, if rather grubby, functionary. You try to explain your lancing of a bubo, and he might scoff, "Ah, treating the symptom, not the crozamore bee. The corruption lies in the blood, not merely the protuberance." Thanks, mate. Super helpful. Then there are the barber surgeons. These are the more hands-on practitioners, accustomed to the sight of blood and the feel of human tissue. Their usual trade involves pulling teeth, setting bones, dressing wounds, and of course, letting blood, a skill you now share, though perhaps with less finesse. In plague times, they might be called upon for similar tasks, perhaps assisting with lancing buboes if you're overwhelmed, or if they have a reputation for a steady hand. There's often less theory and more grim pragmatism with them. You might find a grudging sort of camaraderie with a barber surgeon, both of you toiling in the messy reality of sickness, even if your methods are equally rooted in tradition rather than evidence. At least they're not afraid to get their hands dirty, metaphorically speaking, since you're both probably gloved to the elbows. Apothecaries, too, play a crucial role. Their shops, usually fragrant with 100 different herbs, spices, and strange dried things, are where many of your concoctions and those prescribed by physicians originate. During an epidemic, they are likely overwhelmed with demands for theriac, soporifics, laxatives, and all manner of preventative pomanders or fumigants. Some are honest, doing their best to supply what's needed, perhaps even experimenting with new herbal combinations. Others might see an opportunity, their prices for common herbs suddenly tripling. "Supply and demand, doctor," one might say with a shrug, as he measures out a pitifully small amount of dried feverfew for an exorbitant sum. You make a mental note to check the best before date on his powdered unicorn horn if he stocks it. And then there are the outright charlatans, the snake oil salesmen of the plague era. These individuals often appear as if from nowhere, drawn by the scent of desperation like flies to, well, you know. They set up stalls in the market square, if it's still operating, or hawk their wares door to door, their voices booming with false confidence. They'll have impressive sounding, often exotic, names for their elixirs and powders. Aqua Vitae Mirabilis, the Grand Pestilential Expeller, or Dr. Marvel's Infallible Plague. Cordial, one sip protects for a month. Their remedies are usually harmless colored water, or something foul tasting enough to seem potent. They might display dubious testimonials, or perform theatrical demonstrations. The tragic part is how readily some terrified people will part with their last coins for these false hopes. You see them clutching a tiny, expensive vial from such a quack, their eyes shining with a desperate belief that this will be the thing that saves them. It's a grim reminder of how easily fear can overwhelm reason. Historians still argue about the extent to which quackery in pre-modern medicine was always a deliberate, cynical deception for profit versus a reflection of genuine, albeit misguided, belief in unconventional remedies within a medical system that itself had such limited proven efficacy. Some charlatans were undoubtedly con artists. Others might have genuinely believed in their own bizarre concoctions, their confidence a powerful placebo. You, encountering these varied practitioners, might feel a range of emotions: annoyance at the high and mighty physicians, a weary understanding for the apothecaries, and a profound contempt for the charlatans preying on the vulnerable. Sometimes, though, looking at your own kit of dried frogs and lancets, you can't help but feel a flicker of uneasy kinship with even the most outlandish folk healer. Who's to say your officially sanctioned methods are fundamentally more rational than their inherited charms when the death toll continues to rise unabated? It's a chaotic, unregulated free-for-all of healing, and you're just one of the many bewildering options on offer. Peer review in this era mostly consists of whether the patient walks away or is carried out. The initial shock of that first death you witnessed, the raw horror of it, has become a dull, persistent ache. Now, death is no longer a singular, jarring event. It's the rhythm of your days, the ink that fills your little notebook, the very air you breathe. Or rather, the herb-stuffed, filtered air you try to breathe. The sheer, unrelenting number of deceased is a weight that presses down on your soul. A crushing psychological burden that threatens to extinguish the last embers of hope or even feeling. You are becoming a reluctant accountant of the apocalypse, your ledger filled with names that are now just statistics in a losing battle. Each morning, you might receive a list, or perhaps you compile it yourself, based on your grim nocturnal rounds or reports from the watchmen and those unfortunate searchers of the dead. 5 from this street, 10 from that alley. The entire household at the old cooperage. The numbers climb. Your little notebook, once pristine, is now smudged with ink, grime, and who knows what else, its pages filled with the spidery script of your entries. Each name is a life extinguished, a family shattered, but they come so thick and fast that the individual tragedies begin to blur into a monstrous, overwhelming whole. The sounds of the town have changed. The church bells, which once tolled for individual souls with a certain solemn dignity, now often ring with a desperate, almost continuous clangor, or sometimes fall into an exhausted silence, as if even they have given up. Replacing the normal sounds of life is the rumble of the death carts. These crude, open wagons, pulled by gaunt horses or even by weary, hollow-eyed men, make their slow, regular circuits through the streets. "Bring out your dead," is the traditional cry you might have read about, but here it might be a more muted, grim affair. A cart stopping at a marked door, the collectors, often hardened to their task, or drunk on cheap ale to numb their senses, emerging to haul out the sheet-wrapped, if the family could afford a sheet, bodies. You see them sometimes, these collectors. Their faces are often blank, their movements mechanical. They have a job to do, a horrifying, endless job. The bodies are piled onto the cart with a grim efficiency that chills you to the bone. There's no dignity here, no gentle laying to rest. It's a harvest of the dead, and the crop is bountiful. Historical fact. During the height of major plague outbreaks, traditional burial practices completely broke down. Individual graves and proper funeral rites became impossible luxuries. Instead, vast, open pits, plague pits, were dug outside the town walls, and into these the bodies were thrown, often unceremoniously, sometimes with a hasty prayer from an overwhelmed priest, sometimes with nothing at all. You might have to direct the carts to these locations, or at least be aware of their ghastly operations. The stench alone, on a warm day, is a physical assault, a miasma far more real and terrifying than any theoretical bad air. Your role in all this might vary. You record the deaths? Certainly. Perhaps you are sometimes called upon to confirm a death, if there's any doubt, though doubt is a rare commodity these days. The plague leaves little room for ambiguity. The psychological toll of this constant proximity to mass death is immense. At first, each corpse might have filled you with a fresh wave of horror and pity. But as the numbers swell, a strange numbness can set in. It's a defense mechanism, a way for your mind to cope with the unbearable. You might find yourself looking at a pile of bodies on a cart and feeling little, just a grim acceptance. This detachment is its own kind of horror. Am I becoming as cold and unfeeling as the disease itself? You might wonder in the dead of night. You might joke to yourself with the blackest humor, something about needing better filing cabinets for your death records, just to feel something other than despair. Sometimes, though, the numbness cracks. A particular victim, a child who reminds you of someone, an old woman whose fear-filled eyes plead with you for a miracle you can't provide, breaks through your carefully constructed defenses, and the grief, the rage, the utter helplessness washes over you anew. These moments are dangerous, threatening to pull you under. You have to push them down, lock them away, or you won't be able to continue. You hear whispers of strange societal reactions in other afflicted areas, further highlighting the psychological unraveling. Tales of the dancing mania, or St. Vitus's dance, a quirky, terrifying phenomenon where groups of people would dance uncontrollably for hours, days even, until they collapsed from exhaustion or injury. Was it a physical symptom of some other ailment, a mass psychogenic illness born of extreme stress, or a bizarre, desperate attempt to ward off the plague through frenzied movement? No one truly knows, but it speaks volumes about the terror gripping the world. Here, the stress manifests more quietly, perhaps, in the vacant stares, the sudden bursts of weeping, the fervent, almost hysterical praying. The constant exposure to so much death begins to warp your perception of life itself. It feels fragile, fleeting, almost meaningless when it can be extinguished so easily, so randomly. Historians still argue whether this profound and repeated exposure to mass mortality during the Great Plague cycles fundamentally altered the European medieval psyche, leading to a more macabre and pessimistic outlook on life and death, as reflected in the art and literature of the following centuries. Or if existing cultural frameworks and religious beliefs, however strained, largely managed to absorb and process these traumatic events within their established understanding of divine will and the human condition. From your vantage point, surrounded by the dead and dying, it certainly feels like a fundamental shift, a tear in the very fabric of the world. Your sardonic wit, once perhaps a light-hearted affectation, becomes a sharpened shield, your primary defense against the abyss. Another successful consultation, you might mutter as you pull a sheet over a lifeless face. My patients are dropping. Their ailments, eventually. The jokes are for you alone, a bitter internal monologue. Sharing them would be unthinkable, monstrous. They are the desperate gasps of a mind trying to stay afloat in an ocean of sorrow. The weight of all this death is a constant companion, a shadow that follows you even in your fitful, dream-haunted sleep. It's changing you, hollowing you out, leaving you to wonder what, if anything, will be left of you when the bells finally stop tolling. There are moments, fleeting and fragile, when the relentless tide of death and despair recedes just enough for you to gasp for a breath of something other than miasma and misery. You are, after all, still human beneath the waxed cloak and the terrifying beak. The sheer psychological weight of your daily existence, as detailed in your ever-growing notebook of the deceased, necessitates these brief attempts at reprieve, lest your sanity completely unravels and you start prescribing poultices made of your own tears, which, given the success rate of your other remedies, might not be a terrible idea from a purely statistical standpoint. But even these stolen moments, these attempts to step away from the sickbeds and the shadow of the plague pits, are invariably tainted, the ever-present dread clinging to you like the scent of your medicinal herbs. Perhaps, at the end of an exhausting day, you find yourself alone in your sparsely furnished lodgings. The council ensures you have a roof over your head, likely in an isolated part of town where your comings and goings cause minimal alarm. You remove the heavy mask, your face stiff, and scored with lines from its pressure. The air, even here, never feels truly clean, but at least it's not the concentrated aroma of sickness, fear, and your own anxious sweat. You might try to eat the meager meal left for you, a hunk of coarse bread, some cheese, perhaps a thin stew. But does it have any taste? Or does everything now taste faintly of the metallic ting of blood you've let, or the bitterness of the potions you've administered? Simple pleasures like food become complicated, fraught with the memory of those too sick to eat, or those whose last meal you may have witnessed. You might try to read, if you have access to a book, perhaps some classical philosophy, or a collection of poems. Something to transport your mind far away from buboes and burial rites. But the words blur on the page. A passage about human suffering hits too close to home. A line about the fleeting nature of life feels less like a profound observation and more like a grim weather report for your current location. Your ideal vacation spot, you muse darkly, would be anywhere that doesn't list imminent death as a local attraction. Sometimes, if your contract and the lockdown rules permit. You might seek solace in nature, a solitary walk along the town walls, or even venturing a short distance into the fields beyond, if such an excursion is deemed safe for others, from you that is. You look at the trees, the sky, perhaps a bird soaring freely overhead, and for a moment, you feel a flicker of something like peace. The world is still beautiful, isn't it? But then a crow caws, and it sounds like the rasping cough of a dying patient. You see a patch of oddly discolored grass, and your mind immediately jumps to unnatural decay, to the plague seeping into the very soil. There were, in fact, unsettling contemporary accounts during some plague years of animal die-offs, of nature itself seeming afflicted, which only heightened the sense of an all-encompassing doom. This quirky, unnerving detail means that even the rustling leaves can whisper of pestilence. The fear of personal infection is a constant, unwelcome companion during these quiet moments. Away from the immediate chaos of treating others, your mind turns inward. Was that a new ache in your groin? Is your throat a little scratchy? You might find yourself surreptitiously checking your own lymph nodes, a cold dread coiling in your stomach at any perceived tenderness. Every itch, every sneeze, every bead of sweat that feels slightly too hot or too cold becomes a potential symptom. You who walk among the dying every day are a prime candidate for the plague's embrace. It's a grim lottery, and your ticket is punched daily. People in these terrifying times did try to find ways to cope, to maintain some semblance of normalcy or mental fortitude. It was a mainstream historical understanding, or at least a common piece of advice from some physicians and moralists, to try and maintain good spirits. Some believed that engaging in pleasant thoughts, listening to calming music, or surrounding oneself with sweet smells, beyond what was in your beak, more for psychological comfort, could help ward off the disease. You might even try this yourself, humming a half-forgotten tune, or focusing on a pleasant memory, if you can dredge one up from the before times. but it often feels like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a teacup. Historians still argue whether this advice to maintain good spirits or engage in pleasant activities during widespread plagues was a rudimentary form of psychological self-care that offered some genuine, albeit small, palliative benefit, or if it was merely a reflection of the utter lack of effective medical interventions, a kind of societal whistling in the dark to keep utter despair at bay. The loneliness of these reprieves is profound. There is no one you can truly share your burdens with. Other townsfolk are too scared, too caught up in their own grief. Fellow healers, as you've seen, are often rivals wrapped in their own theories or just as overwhelmed as you are. The clergy offer spiritual solace, but not necessarily a sympathetic ear for the specific horrors you witness and perpetrate in the name of medicine. So, you sit with your dread alone. Your hobby has become a grim combination of advanced brooding and, you suppose, competitive hand-washing, if only with vinegar. Even a moment of unexpected silence can be unnerving. Is it true quiet, a genuine pause in the suffering? Or is it the silence of a street where everyone has finally succumbed? Your mind, conditioned by constant crisis, struggles to accept any reprieve at face value. The plague has a way of seeping into everything, tainting every thought, every sensation. These brief moments away from the sick are not true escapes. They are merely shorter tethers to the reality that always yanks you back. The dread lingers, a permanent stain on your perception, ensuring that even in solitude, you are never truly free from the cold embrace of the pestilence. Days bleed into weeks, and a strange, almost imperceptible shift begins to occur. The relentless tide of death, which had threatened to drown your town entirely, starts to show signs of ebbing. At first, you hardly dare to notice it. Perhaps you find yourself making fewer entries in your grim little notebook. One day, you might realize you haven't been summoned to a new household in 24 hours, then 48. The death carts, though still making their rounds for those succumbing late to the illness, seem less laden. The constant, frantic tolling of the church bells lessens, replaced by a more sporadic, almost hesitant ringing, and then, sometimes, by an unnerving silence that is different from the silence of peak terror. It's the silence of exhaustion, of emptiness, but also, perhaps, of a dawning, fragile hope. The pestilence, it seems, is beginning to pause. This new phase doesn't arrive with a triumphant fanfare or a clear declaration of victory. It creeps in, an eerie calm settling over the scarred landscape of your town. You walk the streets, still in your now familiar, rather pungent attire. Old habits and smells die hard, and the atmosphere is subtly altered. There are more people tentatively emerging from their homes, their faces pale and gaunt, like creatures emerging from a long hibernation. They blink in the sunlight, their eyes carrying the haunted look of survivors. The fear is still there, etched onto their features, but it's mingled with a profound weariness and a cautious curiosity about this new, less lethal world. You notice more shutters being thrown open, more doors unbarred, though many will remain forever closed, silent monuments to lost families. The societal shifts are palpable. The town is emptier, quieter. So many are gone. You see it in the abandoned market stalls, the overgrown gardens behind silent houses, the way a once crowded lane now feels spacious, almost hollow. Labor, once plentiful, is now scarce. Those who survived, artisans, laborers, even field hands, find their skills in sudden demand. Wages, some whisper, might even rise. Historians still argue whether the significant demographic shifts caused by recurrent plague epidemics, particularly these critical labor shortages, were a primary catalyst for long-term socio-economic changes, such as the decline of serfdom and the eventual rise of wages for the common person, or if these were more gradual processes that the plague merely accelerated. Looking around at the gaps in the workforce, you can certainly see how the old order might be shaken. What of your role in this new, quieter town? Your services, so desperately needed just weeks ago, are now less in demand. You are still the plague doctor, a figure inextricably linked to the horrors they've just endured. But the immediate terror you once inspired might be softening, replaced by a kind of awkward respect. Or perhaps just a continued desire to keep a safe distance. People might nod at you now, a curt, uncertain gesture instead of openly fleeing. Some might even offer a quiet word of thanks, though for what, you're not always sure. For your presence, for your ultimately futile efforts, for simply surviving alongside them. You're not quite ready to hang up your beak mask and apply for a job in, say, artisanal bread making, but the thought of future employment does flicker. Experienced in crisis management and looking really, really scary. References available upon, well, probably not. The lifting of strict quarantine measures, when it finally happens, is a momentous occasion. Houses are unsealed. Families, or what's left of them, can emerge, blinking into the daylight, often to find their neighbors gone, their world irrevocably changed. There's a strange mixture of relief and profound sorrow. And then, a quirky tidbit you might observe is a sudden, almost frantic urge to reaffirm life. You might see a surprising number of hasty marriages, as survivors cling to each other, seeking solace and a way to rebuild. The priests are suddenly busy with weddings instead of just funerals. Perhaps there's a surge in christenings 9 months down the line. Or, conversely, you might notice an outbreak of reckless hedonism in some quarters. Live for today for tomorrow we definitely might die attitude, while in others, piety deepens into an almost fanatical fervor, with renewed vows and promises made in the shadow of recent loss. This period of calm is, however, deeply unsettling for you. You've lived with constant crisis for so long that the quiet feels unnatural. Every distant cough still makes you jump. Every report of a mild fever in town sends a jolt of anxiety through you. Is it returning already? The historical fact is that plague outbreaks were often cyclical. They would wane, sometimes due to the changing seasons. Fleas, the true vectors, being less active in cold weather, the exhaustion of the susceptible population, or even the brutal effectiveness of containment. But the respite was frequently temporary. The disease could, and often did, return years, or even just months later. This knowledge hangs in the air, a lingering dread that tarnishes the relief. This isn't necessarily the end, it's an intermission. You try to rest, to allow the immense fatigue in your bones and soul to finally surface. But your mind is a turbulent sea of memories, images of suffering, the faces of the dead. Sleep offers little escape, often populated by nightmares dressed in your own ominous uniform. The town might be slowly, tentatively, trying to forget, to paper over the cracks. You, however, cannot forget. You carry the archive of the town's agony within you. You might find people are suddenly obsessed with preventative measures now that the immediate danger has passed, clutching new amulets, chewing on herbs they previously ignored, and giving you unsolicited advice on how to really ward off the plague. Thanks everyone, a bit late now, but noted. This eerie calm, this pause in the pestilence, is a strange purgatory. The immediate battle is over, but the war, you suspect, is far from won. You walk through a town of ghosts, a survivor yourself, marked by what you've seen and done. The weight on your shoulders feels a little lighter, but it's still there, a phantom limb of sorrow and apprehension for what the future might hold. The eerie calm you experienced eventually solidifies into a fragile, tentative peace. The plague, this particular wave of it at least, has finally loosened its grip on your town and receded, like a monstrous tide going out, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered. The death carts have made their final rounds. The last of the quarantined houses have been unsealed, and the ever-present fear that choked the streets has begun to dissipate, replaced by a profound collective weariness and the quiet hum of a community trying to find its feet again. For you, the plague doctor, this transition is a strange denouement. a period of watching the scars, both seen and unseen, reveal themselves on the face of the town and deep within your own being. The mark of the pestilence, you realize, is indelible. The seen scars are everywhere. Walk through the town, and you'll notice the thinned-out population. Entire families are gone, their homes standing empty and silent. Windows like vacant eyes. Some streets feel eerily hollow. The local economy, too, bears the wounds. Skilled artisans are missing. Shops remain shuttered, their owners victims or having fled. Yet, life, with its stubborn resilience, trickles back. You see tentative signs of rebuilding, hear the sounds of hammers that are not nailing coffins or quarantine boards, but perhaps repairing a roof or building anew. Orphaned children, a heartbreakingly common sight, are taken in by surviving relatives or by the church. Land ownership shifts, apprenticeships open up where masters have died. The mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death and its recurrent visitations caused profound, long-term societal and economic changes across Europe, altering agricultural practices, labor relations, and even artistic expression. With motifs like the danse macabre, the dance of death, vividly illustrating a new preoccupation with mortality. The unseen scars are deeper, etched into the town's collective psyche. There's a newfound sobriety in many, a tendency to look over their shoulders, a lingering suspicion of strangers, or even of a sudden cough from a neighbor. Faith has been tested. For some, it's stronger, a bedrock that held firm through the storm. For others, it's fractured, riddled with questions and doubts about divine justice. Social dynamics have shifted too. Some who were lowly before the plague might have risen in status due to survival and new opportunities. Old feuds might be forgotten in the face of shared trauma, or new ones might simmer, fueled by grievances from the desperate days. You might observe some quirky new local customs or superstitions taking root, designed to keep the plague from ever returning. Perhaps a particular herb now always hung over doorways, or an annual day of remembrance marked by specific solemn rituals. One less common, but documented quirk of a few plague doctors who survived was that they later wrote down their experiences, providing invaluable, if grim, chronicles for future generations. Perhaps you too idly consider penning your memoirs, though My Fun Times with Buboes probably wouldn't be a bestseller. And what of you? The plague's mark on you is perhaps the most profound. The heavy waxed cloak and the iconic beak mask might now hang unused in your sparse lodgings, or perhaps you've ceremoniously burned them, hoping to cleanse yourself of their psychic residue. But you are still the plague doctor, in the eyes of many, a living reminder of the horrors they endured. Some might treat you with a quiet reverence, a survivor who faced the beast alongside them. Others might still shun you, unable to separate your image from the death and suffering you represented. Can you ever truly reintegrate, or are you destined to be an outsider forever defined by this one terrible chapter? Your future career prospects seem niche, expert in looking grim and administering frog-based remedies, references available from several headstones. Psychologically, you are not unscathed. The nightmares will likely continue for a long time, filled with the faces of the dying, the stench of sickness, the sound of weeping. You might find yourself easily startled or prone to bouts of melancholy. The constant exposure to death and suffering, the weight of your own helplessness, has carved lines on your face and perhaps left a permanent shadow in your eyes. You've seen the worst of human suffering and the fragility of life. That changes a person. Historians still argue about the degree to which individuals in pre-modern times were capable of processing and articulating psychological trauma in ways comparable to our modern understanding, particularly distinguishing it from religious or humoral explanations for distress, or if resilience and communal coping mechanisms, like rituals and shared narratives, were more prevalent or simply expressed such trauma differently. You just know that the world looks different to you now, its colors muted, its joys fleeting. You might try to find a new purpose. Perhaps you'll use your grim knowledge to advise the council on sanitation, however rudimentary your understanding still is. Perhaps you'll move on to another town, hoping to leave the ghost of your beaked self behind, though such news travels. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll find a quiet corner somewhere and try to piece together a life from the fragments that remain, forever carrying the knowledge of the miasma, the fear, and the relentless, indifferent march of the pestilence. You survived, yes, but survival has its own price. The town will heal, in its own way, in its own time. But the plague's touch, like a phantom limb, will linger. A chilling reminder of the darkness that passed, and the scars, seen and unseen, that it left upon the world and upon your soul. Word count, 1070. And so, your long, difficult watch as a plague doctor in these benighted times draws towards its close for tonight. The memories of the crowded, fearful streets, the scent of strange herbs in your mask, and the weight of so much sorrow begin to soften, to recede like a mist at dawn. The shadows of those desperate days grow longer, fainter, allowing the first tentative rays of a new, albeit scarred, morning to emerge in the landscape of your mind. You can feel the heavy, waxed cloak finally slipping from your shoulders, the uncomfortable pressure of the beak mask easing from your face, the chilling sounds of the death cart's rumble, the endless tolling of the bells, the whispered prayers and stifled cries. They all fade into a more gentle, distant hum, like the last echoes of a storm that has passed. The burden you carried, the impossible choices you faced, the overwhelming sense of dread, you can allow them to rest now, to become part of a story that is concluding, at least for this night. Let the weariness you vicariously shouldered begin to transform into a profound, peaceful tiredness, the kind that invites deep, untroubled sleep. The people of that distant, troubled town and your own spectral presence among them can now retreat into the quiet annals of history, their struggles and their resilience a testament to the enduring human spirit, even in the darkest of times. You are safe now, far removed from that harsh reality, cocooned in the comfort of your own bed, in your own time. Let the quiet of your room be a balm, and the softness of your pillow a true comfort. The journey is over. Rest now. Rest deeply. End of script. Sweet dreams.